people. So in about 2.5 months, I'm going to be doing a workshop on Buddhism and Tarot with Robert Place at the gorgeous Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, in upstate New York. It's going to be, almost a week long, October 16th through 21st. And it's going to be a journey into Robert's brilliant mind around archetype using his fabulous Buddha Tarot, a deck that was just recently re-released in April of this year by Schiffer Books. It's a gorgeous deck, a deck that maps the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, really the story of awakening, the hero's journey, onto the structure of the tarot, and reveals that kind of underlying perennial philosophy of waking up, of discovery, of the arising of compassion, the arising of wisdom, that plays out in Buddhism, but also just beautifully maps on to the structure of the tarot with its 4 suits, like the 4 cardinal directions, and its central sacred center. Anyway, in that workshop, Robert's the expert on his deck, of course, and just the kind of sharpness of his mind around archetype and the history of Hermeticism and the esoteric tarot. It's just, his teaching is going to be fabulous. My part of the workshop will be focused more on the specifically Buddhist pieces of tarot practice, the work that I know best as a mindfulness teacher, as a Zen Dharma teacher, an ordained Zen minister, chaplain, all of the ways in which my life's path has been about using spiritual tools like the tarot, especially the tarot, to open up our hearts and minds to find more ease and peace in our lives. So, in honor of that workshop coming up in October, I wanted to return to an intention that I had a number of years ago, which was to do a YouTube series on Buddhism and Tarot. When I originally wanted to do that series, I was working with Robert's deck in its 2004 iteration. Now coming back to that topic, I'm not going to talk so much specifically about Robert's deck since he's the expert on that. And also, Natalie at Sanskrit Blue has a number of really fabulous videos about Robert's deck, and I'll link the playlist below. So I'll mention his deck a bit. I'll mention the structure of his deck, his fabulous companion book, and his teachings. But mostly what I want to do in this series on Buddhism and Tarot is to lay bare some of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism as they reveal layers of practice in the tarot, and that sort of meeting ground between the tarot as a tool to bring us to greater openness and ease in our lives with the teachings that are most central to Buddhism. And I want to start with what is both the starting point of the tarot and the starting point of Buddhist practice. That starting point is the question, right? Now, in every single introductory class or book on tarot, there will be some teaching, instruction around how to formulate a good question, right? It's just it's a truism, it's a cliche of working with the tarot that a spread can only be as useful and as clear as the question, the intention with which we meet that spread. So how do you ask a good question? That asking a good question is what helps you get a good layout, a good spread, a good response from the cards. The better the question, the better the spread. That's completely true. But typically when we talk about how to create a good question in a tarot reading, we're focused on finding a good answer. Now, what Buddhism teaches, and what I would argue the tarot also teaches, is that the focus is not the answer. Lives are not changed by answers. What changes lives are questions, right? All the great spiritual journeys that I've ever heard about, whether you're talking about, like St. Paul or St. Francis or Martin Buber or Viktor Frankl or Martin Luther or, these are just a random assortment of names of people, Thomas Merton. that have affected me. Dorothy Day, Dogen Zenji, the founder of my tradition in Soto Zen. These are all people who have inspired me. They're all people whose spiritual paths revolved around, an evolving set of questions, or really one question often. Why are there poor on this earth? Why, if God is almighty, do I nonetheless have to work and worry so hard for my salvation? Why is there suffering? Why, if the truth is everywhere available, am I still confused? These questions, the big questions of a spiritual life, what makes them big questions is not because the answers are the be-all and end-all. It's that the questions themselves animate our journey on the path. I think about this in a very mundane and everyday sense in terms of what it is to fall in love. When I fell in love with my husband, when I first met this man and he exploded my universe, that was all about question, like, what the hell? What now? And then when we got married, like, how do I do this? What is this being in love? How do I wake up every morning and be in love? That's kind of the central question of this koan or puzzle that is the yoga of committed long-term relationships, right? The poet Rilke says in his Letters to a Young Poet, he famously says, live the questions. Live the questions like locked rooms or books written in a foreign tongue. Live the questions. And then one day, without even realizing it, you'll live your way into the answer. Into the answers, actually, plural. Right? Live the questions, and then you'll find your way living into the answers. So the question is everything. And this is really, this is where the tarot begins, because this stance of the question, this is the stance of the Fool. Walking forward into the unknown. Actually, in Zen Buddhism, we talk about meditation often with the phrase of taking the backward step. That when we sit to meditate, we're precisely not walking forward, because walking forward often seems like, I'm moving into my life. I'm looking for answers. I'm looking for clarity. I'm trying to illuminate the path in front of me. I'm walking toward stuff that I see and that I know. I'm headed somewhere. But when I sit down to meditate, I'm taking the backward step. Instead of turning my light of awareness outward and trying to illuminate my path and figure things out, I turn that light of awareness inward. I become curious about my breath, about the sensations in my skin, in my body, in the thoughts moving in my mind. I open into this space of inquiry when I sit and meditate, when I open into mindfulness practice. And in a sense, that's what the Fool is doing. Even though he is walking forward, he's at the edge of a cliff, right? He is moving into the unknown. He doesn't have the answers. And that's precisely what moves his journey forward, is living in this space of question. That's where tarot begins. And that's also where Buddhist practice begins, and why, particularly in traditions like Zen and Buddhism, why this focus on meditation is so important, because in meditation, we're literally practicing this open, questioning stance. I sit, I become curious about my experience. Rather than trying to figure it out, I try to just open into it, to notice my breath, to notice my physical and emotional and mental experience, like, as Rilke says, like locked rooms or books written in a very foreign tongue. I live my life as question. This stance of curiosity, of beginner's mind. So Buddhism begins with the question. Like all great spiritual journeys, the tarot also begins with a question. And that's the starting point of a link between Buddhism and tarot. That's also the starting point of the Mindful Tarot Challenge for August 2022. So each month in the Mindful Tarot community, which bracket, if you're not a member of the community yet, please consider joining. It's as easy as sending me an email and then getting set up on our Facebook page and then coming to our community Zooms. It's open to everyone. We have a Zoom meeting once a month. Yeah, join the community. Hey, join. Or don't. The path is yours. But in the Mindful Tarot community, I've been posing these challenges each month to kind of invite us all to be curious about our tarot practice. So this month, August 2022, the challenge is revolve the card. And this is this really, for me, a very fundamental practice I've been doing for a long time now, and I've started to talk a lot more about in these videos and in my Mindful Tarot community, this practice of like this open-ended inquiry into the deck. So, we start with a question that a card, perhaps, that's provoking us in some way, that's making us, I don't get it, I don't know. This card that is inviting a kind of backward step, a kind of opening into the unknown. So for me, that card in August, that card is my card of the month, the starting point. My card of the month, the card that I drew for August in the beginning of the year, was the Seven of Cups. This is a card that is for me clearly about choice, about what it means to have the opportunity, like all of these options that are kind of fantastical in my mind. And foremost in them is this image of the being under the veil, that sort of image of the esoteric, of the hidden, of the arcane. Like there's this great mystery perhaps of life and all these paths I can pursue and all these ways that I can go. And how do I manifest that? How do I unveil my future? How do I choose? What does it mean to choose? And that's a relevant question for me right now because I'm at a kind of crossroads in my professional life. How do I choose? So that was my starting point, this question. We start with a question, but then revolving the card, okay? So the goal here isn't to answer the question. The goal is to live the question more deeply. This is both a Buddhist goal, like Buddhist practice, take the backward step, live into the question, open into the unknown. Don't try to fix things, but actually try to open ourselves to the flux of life, to the impermanence of life, to the permeability of all phenomena. But it's also a crucial part of a mindful tarot practice. So here's my starting point, my question. And then the method for me has been to use that card as a significator. So I tuck it into the deck, I put it into the deck, I shuffle the deck, and then I flip the deck over one at a time. And I've been doing this 2-card spread, this Roots and Canopy spread. So when I come across, as I did yesterday, the Seven of Cups, I'm curious about what the card is that's directly before it, that's immediately before it, and that becomes my canopy card, which was the Nine of Pentacles. And then the card that was underneath it, that I flipped over after I came to it, that's my root card. So I have sort of my foundation and my canopy, my expanding of that root. The image here is of a tree, the roots and the canopy. Okay, so I started with the question of choice. How do I choose? What does it mean to choose? And I got these cards. Now, rather than try to answer my question, rather than try to nail down, okay, how do I choose? Here's how I choose. I'm going to answer in quotes, my question with a question, the question that these cards bring forward. So I'm noticing in the Queen of Pentacles, and this, by the way, is my 1999 Möwig, the German edition of this deck, which has really nice coloration. It captures the Albano weight coloration, and the cardstock is nice, but that's why the title's in German. So, you've got the Queen of Pentacles. She's a card that I always struggle with. Like, what does it mean to be water, that watery, emotional, spiritual aspect of earth? This is like clearly a card that's about nourishment and nurturing and getting grounded, but I'm not sure what that means, but clearly that's at the root here, getting grounded, sort of bringing my attention back to to the fundamentals of life, and then opening into this space of really relishing the garden. So my question was, how do I choose? What does it mean to choose? And then my eye got drawn to the falcon, the hooded falcon here. I happened to be reading this book called H is for Hawk, about falconry. Gorgeous book. I'm like, oh, how do I choose? How do I set my wildness free? Something about being grounded, but being able, because I'm grounded, to set my wildness free. How can I set my wildness free? So in revolving this question, like answering the question with a question, I've moved from how do I choose to how do I set my wildness free? And then I revolve the card, meaning I'm going to take a card from that reading, the card that is most problematic or confusing to me, the card that's most questionable to me, which is the Queen of Pentacles, the card I understand the least. And that card is going to be my significator for today's reading. So this was yesterday's reading, and now I'm moving into today's reading. And today's reading, I use the Queen of Pentacles as my significator. I also switched decks, which you may or may not want to do. And I switched to the Ostara Tarot and using the Queen of Pentacles as my significator card. And then I got a new root and a new canopy. And boy, I knew I was onto something here because I got birds. The Eight of Wands and the Two of Swords. So how do I set my wildness free? Well, the Eight of Wands, my wildness is free, right? The bird of prey is flying fast, right? That's my roots. That's my starting point. So the question becomes, now that my wildness is free, now that I am free, what do I see? Because again, now I have a hooded bird. So I'm back to the question of choice, right? Because the Two of Swords is so much about choice. But now that question has evolved because I revolved the card. I evolved the question and I revolved the card. And now the question of choice has become not just how do I set my wildness free, but once free, how do I see? So now I'm wondering about sight. Or what do I see? So from choice to freedom and wildness to the question of sight. So in this method where I'm evolving my question, I'm revolving the card, I'm keeping the conversation going with the deck, I'm moving from one card into the next reading, then moving from that reading into the next reading, I'm keeping the thread going, I'm keeping the question alive. The image I always have here is like a good question, which we keep alive. It's like putting a tennis shoe that's wet into the dryer. Have you ever done that? And the shoe just kicks around, and at least in American dryers, our big old American dryers, it's like that tennis shoe drying and the dryers go thunk, thunk, thunk. I'm letting the question thunk around, right? Stir around in my heart. I'm allowing myself to live the question, and the question is evolving. And I'm going to be living that question and evolving that question, revolving the cards for the month of August. This is a foundational mindful tarot practice. It's also taking the question, which is at the juncture, what a question is and how important it is to spiritual practice. It's at the juncture of where Buddhism and tarot meet. So it all begins with the question. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Ask me stuff in the comments below. Get on our Facebook page. Let's talk. Let's play. As always, thank you so much for your practice. Take good care, all.